Lord of Mysteries, Incarnation of Chaos by author Yu Shang Wu Wang Chuan. Chapter 476-491. Chapter 476 The Original Witch and the Blood Emperor. Chapter 476, Primordial Demoness and Blood Emperor. Madam, how long have you had these symptoms? A voice sounded. Roland, who had appeared at some unknown time, pushed up the gold-rimmed glasses on his face with a serious expression and looked at the primordial demoness not far away, saying, "We usually don't call your situation, love, even in the two-dimensional world. This is severe yandere. My personal suggestion is for you to turn left and find Adam, see a psychologist, maybe there's still hope. I'm afraid even Adam can't cure her condition. Just restart, maybe after reincarnation, she can become a normal person." Medici was clearly not surprised by Roland's appearance. He stroked Little Red on his shoulder, his tone filled with undisguised mockery. The primordial demoness looked at Roland with great apprehension. Although she was a sequence 0, due to being ostracized, her access to information was even worse than that of the god of war. However, this did not prevent the primordial demoness from understanding the other party's danger the moment she faced Roland. "In regarding the point you just made, madam, there's one thing I must refute." Roland said this, then smiled and placed his hand on Medici's shoulder. The latter glanced at him and let him be. Roland smiled and said, "Although Medici might not understand love, love is by no means limited to romantic love between men and women. In the realms of family affection and friendship, I'm afraid he understands it better than you." "Hey, perhaps." The primordial demoness suddenly laughed, her smile enchanting and infinitely charming. Her gaze fell on Roland, and she said, "What about you? Mr. Lucifer, do you understand love?" "No, allow me to rephrase, can a monster like you truly possess emotions?" Roland raised his eyebrow upon hearing this, not getting angry, as he had heard such words too many times. Roland merely said with some helplessness, "Why do you all like to question the existence of my emotions so much? I'm clearly trying very hard to act like a human. So someone really should reflect on himself, whether he usually acts too inhumanly." Medici glanced at him, not at all hiding his schadenfreude. "I have reflected." Roland spread his hands frankly and said, "The result of my reflection is that I am already very much like a human, so everyone who questions me should reflect on themselves." Medici was silent for a second, then suddenly said sincerely, "I truly envy your mental state." "Thanks, I envy myself too." Roland's smile was radiant. The primordial demoness, who had witnessed their interaction, finally spoke at this moment. "I didn't expect you to actually acknowledge such a monster." "Haha, Medici, have you forgotten the lesson from 1,000 years ago? To give loyalty to such a monster, I truly feel pathetic for you." "None of your business." Medici rolled his eyes and looked at the primordial demoness without politeness, saying, "I still feel sorry for Tudor. Although I dislike him very much, when I think that he was actually loved by someone like you, I even feel a bit of sympathy for him." "I don't think I need your sympathy, Medici." A voice sounded from the primordial demoness's abdomen. The next second, a man's face actually appeared there. That face had very deep features and clearly belonged to someone Medici was very familiar with, Alistair Tudor. Evidently, driven by a sense of crisis during this period, the primordial demoness had performed some actions not present in the original story. Hiss. Seeing this scene, Medici had no reaction yet, but Roland exaggeratedly gasped. He then looked at the primordial demoness with a strange expression, then turned to Medici and suddenly said, "Little Red, are all you hunters like this? Always wanting to physically merge with others at the drop of a hat? Get lost, don't compare me to her." Medici said grumpily. His expression was also not very good, but it wasn't unexpected, as he had anticipated some things. Since learning about the primordial demoness's situation from Roland several months ago, Medici had not been idle. But the primordial demoness was able to survive steadily from the third epoch to the present, even retreating unscathed from the chaotic battles of the fourth epoch. Naturally, she wasn't without some tricks up her sleeve. Plus, Medici still had other matters to attend to, so some of his actions ultimately came to naught. But this still allowed Medici to obtain some intelligence. Thinking of this, Medici's gaze fell on the object of his long-standing hatred, and he suddenly curled his lips into a sarcastic smile, saying, "I didn't expect you still had a dream of becoming a witch." You should have said so earlier. If you had told me sooner, I definitely would have helped you hunt the primordial demoness. That's still better than you, who likes to be someone else's dog. Tudor did not refute Medici's words, not because he agreed, but simply because he was too lazy to waste more words. He merely laughed mockingly. What, being a dog for the sun god and true creator wasn't enough? Now you have to find yourself a new master. Do you really enjoy kneeling at others' feet? A lunatic like you probably wouldn't understand what it's like to have someone truly worth following. Conquest and being conquered are the main themes for hunters. Have you figured it out? Medici also wasn't angry, he just stroked the cat and smiled lazily. He then shook his head and said, as expected, being born a lawyer just doesn't work out, tisk. Yet, you didn't even manage to be a black emperor properly. You're worse than Solomon before you, and worse than Rosal after you. If I were as miserable as you, I would have already exploded with an outer god, at least I could make some contribution. The two former top hunters began to mock each other back and forth, and for a moment, the gunpowder in the air was so thick it could choke a person. It was also the first time Roland had seen Medici mock someone with full firepower. For a moment, he kept taking notes, feeling like he had learned something. Although he also had theosarcasm skill, he was indeed a bit inferior to the professionals and needed further training. The primordial demoness lowered her eyes and stroked her abdomen with great affection. After the two hunters had finished their round of mutual mockery, Roland put away his notes and said, "Are you two done arguing? If you are, I'd like to ask a question." He looked up at the primordial demoness and said with a smile, "Are you preparing to synthesize a mini version of the original creator on the spot?" Roland asked directly and frankly, causing the primordial demoness, who had been gazing at her lover, to pause. The witch raised her eyes to Roland and said with an enchanting smile, "Yes, although this isn't my ideal situation, fortunately." The primordial demoness paused here, her gaze falling on the City of Calamity's avatar on Medici's shoulder, her smile becoming even brighter. She continued, "You two have compensated for that very well. Very insightful." Roland applauded enthusiastically, then showed a curious expression and said seriously, "Do you really think you can succeed? Let's not even mention that I will stop you. Even if I don't stop you, do you think that with only what you possess, you can resurrect the original creator? Even if it's just a youthful version." Chapter 477, The Primordial Demoness Gets Stabbed in the Back Again. "I'm not sure." The primordial demoness shook her head candidly. The next second, her voice and Tudor's resounded together. "But since death is inevitable, why not make it grander and more spectacular? If the whole world could sink together, what a beautiful sight that would be." The atmosphere of the entire mirror world changed at this moment, and the core of the change was the primordial demoness herself. Clearly, their long conversation with Roland and Medici wasn't truly for chatting, but for making certain preparations. At the same time, an extremely evil aura appeared in this space, and the long-dormant dark side of the universe quietly emerged. "Rather than dying silently, you'd prefer to bloom like fireworks. Honestly, if you weren't trying to drag the whole world to its death with you, I'd actually appreciate that outlook on life," Roland said with a smile, then suddenly raised his hand and snapped his fingers, taking a few steps back to shield Medici in front of him. "I recall someone claiming to be here to protect me." Medici glanced at him, speaking sarcastically without a hint of politeness, yet he shifted half a step, ensuring Roland was completely within his protective range. "No choice, my luck's bad today, didn't roll a sequence 0. You can't expect a sequence 2 to deal with this kind of monstrosity, can you?" Roland said self-righteously, then tilted his head to look at the sun god, who had appeared with his snap, and added, "Besides, I've called for backup, haven't I? That's how we summoners are, our main bodies are squishy, and our summoned creatures are the primary combatants." The sun god, referred to as a summoned creature, smiled helplessly but didn't retort. He then looked at the primordial demoness not far away, his expression growing several shades more serious. "It's you." The primordial demoness undoubtedly recognized the sun god, so upon seeing him, she couldn't help but reveal a surprised expression. Then, as if realizing something, she spoke with sudden understanding. "So it's you. No wonder. No wonder Storm, Sun, and Wisdom suddenly united. That's right, besides you, there's probably no one else in this world who could make them so intimately close again." Tutor, as an existence who rose in the fourth epoch, was clearly much more unfamiliar with the sun god. But as the Blood Emperor, he was certainly not ignorant of certain historical events, and thus he guessed something. Long time no see, cheek. The sun god sighed. He gazed at the primordial demoness before him, his eyes devoid of sorrow or joy, and said, I never thought you would possess such an identity. If I had known, you would have fallen long ago. The sun god truly hadn't known the primordial demoness's true background, otherwise Adam wouldn't have supported Tutor in the fourth epoch, allowing that insane couple to almost accomplish the grand feat of synthesizing a mini-creator in the fourth epoch. And towards such a mad and world-threatening existence, the sun god's attitude had always been extremely cold. How heartless, sun god. The primordial demoness seemed unsurprised by the sun god's words. She smiled and said, no wonder Adam chose to sacrifice Medici so easily. It's because you are, at your core, such a heartless man. God loves the world, but you only love the world, not any single individual. The sun god remained noncommittal. He merely raised his hand, and brilliant golden sunlight illuminated the space, dispelling the destructive power that was silently corroding the entire area. The primordial demoness's expression also became serious, mixed with a hint of excitement. While clashing with the sun god greatly increased the possibility of failure, it also filled her with anticipation. At their core, both the primordial demoness and Tutor were somewhat warlike, yearning for conquest. This was an instinct brought forth by their respective pathways. Just then, the primordial demoness suddenly sensed something. A solid ice barrier condensed, blocking the sharp blade aimed at her lower back. However, though the blade was blocked, the attack wasn't completely stopped, and a corrupting force still invaded the primordial demoness. Farbati. The primordial demoness cried out in disbelief. She then repelled the demon lord, asking in shock, why? Then the primordial demoness seemed to think of something, and said with a mocking smile, do you think these saviors would be willing to accept you, full of sins? It doesn't matter. Farbati finally spoke. The demon lord, who had been silent since his appearance, looked at the primordial demoness with heavy eyes and said, whether they accept me or not, I've long been prepared to die, but not to be buried with you two crazy lovers. This was Farbati's sincere thought. Although Roland had contacted him, he didn't fully trust this obviously dangerous individual, nor was he sure if the other party could save him. But the demon lord still agreed to stab the primordial demoness in the back. There was no special reason, mainly, Farbati would only die in a war against an outer god, and he had even made certain preparations for that. How could he possibly be dragged to his grave by the primordial demoness and Tutor, that insane couple? You two, although I don't really understand love, I still have to say, see a psychologist. You're sick, and quite seriously so, truly. Farbati looked at the primordial demoness and Tutor, and said so. While the mirror world was in chaos, in the real world, Amon, as in King of Angels, had easily suppressed all the demigods. Although there were even angel-level existences among them, for Amon, as long as they weren't Sequence 1, they were merely crunchy little biscuits. Of course, Amon wouldn't eat them. As for where the Sequence 1s of Intis and Fosak and other countries went, one can only say, do not underestimate the keenness of Sequence 1s and their ability to stay hidden. It's never surprising for such beings to make two-pronged preparations, on one hand, tacitly allowing others to unite with the primordial demoness, and on the other, preparing for failure, surrender, or escape. Amon didn't care about this. After all, he knew very well that whether these Sequence 1s surrendered sincerely or feigned sincerity, someone would teach them a lesson. If these people could honestly be good people for their entire lives, they would naturally survive. But if they had any doubts and wanted to act on them, then sorry, the Republic was in need of some high sequence characteristics. Do you know why Roland never cared whether those who were willing to repent were sincere or feigning? Because he would never give them a second chance, and sometimes he would even deliberately set traps. And those who could pretend to be good people their entire lives, while in Roland's eyes still different from truly good people, he could accept them. Thinking of this, Amon shook his head, then glanced at the invincible uprising army. After estimating the time it would take for them to capture the capital of Intis, he fell into silence. Today, decisive battles broke out in more than one place. Besides the capital of Intis, the battle situations in other countries were basically similar, though there weren't as many demigods or and primordial demoness ambushing nearby. This meant that after today, this war of revolution would almost come to an end, with only some finishing touches remaining. Chapter 478, The Primordial Demoness Falls. So fast. Amon hooked his lips into a smile. If it had been a few months ago, he would never have believed that this world would undergo such a tremendous change, nor would he have believed that he would even become one of the members pushing this change. This was an incredibly unbelievable matter for Amon. Yet, all of this just happened, like a miracle. Or rather, it was a miracle brought by a monster. Are you secretly slandering me in your heart? A familiar voice sounded by his ear. Amon turned his head to look and, sure enough, saw a familiar figure. He calmly raised a hand to push up the monocle on his face, smiling as he said, just contemplating some facts. Amon smiled and retorted, aren't you a monster who brings miracles? You're getting bolder and bolder. Looks like I haven't hit you enough lately. Roland said this, yet he wasn't angry at all. Or rather, he rarely got angry because of how others addressed him. Roland didn't even pay too much attention to Amon, because he was more focused on the battle situation at hand. And as Roland confirmed the rebel army's progress, spatial fluctuations appeared once again. This time, it was Medici who appeared. Compared to before, Medici now had an added sense of exhilaration, which made his smile even more unrestrained. With a glance at the battlefield, Medici understood the current situation. He almost seamlessly took over command from the adjutant and personally drew the concluding period for this war. And as Medici commanded the rebel army, Amon and Roland squatted together on the side, watching the show. They were neither needed nor suitable to participate in the upcoming battlefield. After all, some things still needed to be accomplished by mortals themselves. Medici, as a general, could intervene, but they were not suitable. I'm not surprised you could win. What I'm more curious about is Cheek dead? Amon pulled out a bag of melon seeds from nowhere and asked while cracking them. Give me some. Roland unceremoniously grabbed half of the melon seeds from his bag before replying, she's definitely dead, but most likely not completely. The witch pathway is very good at surviving, but the uniqueness and the sequence 1 characteristics have already been obtained by us. Even if she revives, at most she'll be a sequence 2, unable to stir up any trouble. This was the truth. With the sun god personally taking action and the demon lord's backstab, the primordial demoness and tutor, this pair of madmen, undoubtedly lost. However, even the sun god could not completely guard against a sequence 0's revival contingency. High sequence beyonders in this world were just that resilient. At the sequence 0 level, it was rare for one to die completely. For example, a certain god of war, Roland wasn't unaware that he might have a revival contingency, but he didn't bother to deal with it. However, although it was impossible to determine if the primordial demoness would revive, the uniqueness of the witch pathway and 3 sequence 1 characteristics had indeed been obtained by Roland. That's right, these items were now in Roland's hands, kept by Roland. The main reason was that Roland wasn't very keen on Medici becoming the calamity of destruction, and Medici himself wasn't particularly strong in his desire for it. Since Roland objected, he didn't push for it much either. And after the primordial demoness fell, the demon lord Farbati agreed on a time with Roland and then left. His condition was not good, this attack was already very strenuous for him. As for the great terror deep within the mirror world, Roland and the sun god naturally dealt with it to ensure no problems would arise. Hearing Roland's reply, Amon seemed to smile, saying with a sigh, she probably didn't expect such an outcome. However, the truth is, whether I was involved or not, the primordial demoness could not have succeeded. Failure was her only outcome. Roland shook his head and said with a smile, so, this matter tells us not to be too insane as a person, and not to destroy the world at every turn, otherwise it's easy to be treated as a boss to be farmed. Do you even have the nerve to say that? Medici suddenly appeared beside the two of them. Having finished commanding the battlefield, he glanced at Roland, and just as unceremoniously grabbed a large handful of melon seeds from Amon, saying, when it comes to destroying the world, a certain someone is a professional, at least verbally. How can that be the same? Roland was displeased and retorted, they are purely, if they can't rule the world, they'll drag the world to its death. I'm different. I'm not interested in ruling the world, I only pursue what I want. And now, unless absolutely necessary, I won't destroy the world. Hey! Medici let out a laugh of unknown meaning. No choice, the sunk cost is too high. Roland spread his hands, saying candidly, destroying the world means I would turn against all my friends, including you, including little K, including the sun god, including Ask. He listed the names of the people he was familiar with, one by one, like counting his treasures, and finally sighed, saying, you've trapped me, with those emotions, with that humanity, with those beautiful memories, you've trapped me. Medici's lips seemed to hook up. He then said lazily, since you're trapped, then honestly be a good governor, and don't think about going crazy all day long. Well, Roland blinked, neither agreeing nor refusing. Amon, however, raised a hand to push up the monocle on his face, and seriously asked, why only little Amon? When listing the names, just now, Roland only mentioned little Amon, not Amon. Because I feel you wouldn't fight me to the death if I were to destroy the world. Roland pinched his chin, answering with a stereotypical response. Prejudice. Amon said this. He looked at the rebel soldiers who had already planted red flags emblazoned with sickles and hammers on the city wall opposite. At this moment, he didn't know what he was thinking, and after a long time, he finally said. I still don't understand why Father was willing to sacrifice everything for this world, nor do I understand what is called courage and sacrifice. Amon paused here, then turned his head to look at Roland and said, but at least for Father, I will try to protect this world. Roland met his gaze, looking into those pure black eyes. He suddenly laughed, then clapped his hands like a seal, saying, good. Amon, you can graduate. Clearly, Time Angel Amon, who once knew nothing of humanity, and could even be said to disdain it, had now understood what humanity was. Even if his humanity was not as noble and brilliant as the sun gods, it was still humanity. I actually think I'm still far from graduating. Amon raised a hand to push up the monocle on his face, looking at Roland and smiling, I still have much to learn from you, teacher. Actually, I prefer you call me Seventh Daddy. Roland said with a smile. Amon's movements paused. Sure enough, I'll have to beat up little Amon again later. Chapter 479 Roland promotes to Figurer. The war came to an end not long after. Standing in front of the White Maple Palace, Roland gazed at the long-standing palace, then suddenly turned to Medici and asked with a smile, are you ready? After killing the primordial demoness, Medici had obtained the last conqueror trait. He had already acquired the one in the mirror world before. I've been ready for a long time, Medici said, uncharacteristically without any sarcasm. He then took out the remaining 2 conqueror traits, concocted them into a potion on the spot, and drank it all in one gulp. Roland watched Medici's actions. At this moment, it was false to say he wasn't nervous, but he had already saved Medici's progress, so even if an accident occurred, he could correct it in time. Fortunately, Medici lived up to his name as War Angel. Moments later, all high sequence beyonders related to him across the world sensed a change. The Sequence 0 Red Priest of the War Pathway was born. This was not the first true god born recently, and perhaps not the last, but it still made many people sigh with emotion. After Medici opened his eyes, Roland breathed a sigh of relief and asked with a smile, how does it feel to be a Red Priest? Haven't you experienced it already? Medici glanced at him and retorted. One day, Roland, who had fortunately drawn the Sequence 0 Red Priest ability using the dice of hedonism, had run to him and showed off quite a bit. How can that be the same? Mine was a trial version, yours is the genuine article. Roland spread his hands and then smiled, but you can still bicker with me, which means you're in good shape. Hey, Medici chuckled, not refuting. He did not lack anchors, after all, there were too many of his believers worldwide now, and even if those believers were only shallow believers, Medici's state was still incredibly good. Medici just looked at Roland and said, then what are you still waiting for? What, are you so eager to revive your dear father? Roland teased, then he laughed, but he didn't hesitate either. He also took out the utensils and began to concoct the Figurer potion on the spot. As for the other auxiliary material required for the Figurer potion, Roland had already obtained it from the sun god during this period. Compared to the time memoir potion, the Figurer potion looked very dreamy. It didn't have a specific form, yet it made people immediately associate it with dreams, with illusion, and with things that were both true and false. Medici also witnessed Roland concocting a potion for the first time, which made his gaze towards the figure or potion carry some hesitation. Are you sure this thing can be drunk? My pathway potions are all like this. Anyway, they don't look like they can be drunk, and in fact, besides me, probably no one can drink them, Roland explained simply, then smiled, then I'll drink it. He then drank the figure or potion in one gulp. Unlike the bitter time memoir, the figure's taste was very sweet and cloying, like some soft dessert, but it didn't have a lethal amount of sugar. Instead, it was sweet just right, making people praise it for not being too sweet. This sweetness was like a beginning. After a brief silence, Roland's consciousness became hazy. Moments later, he seemed to recover his clarity and was surprised to find that he had successfully advanced. The figure's ability was indeed as powerful as he imagined. Roland used the figure's ability to revive the sun god, and fortunately found a way to help Bethel contend with the celestial worthy, helping him become the Lord of the Mysteries. Afterward, Roland digested the figure potion at lightning speed, advancing to sequence 1 Son of Chaos. As expected, just as he had anticipated, the potion melted upon entry, and he advanced to sequence 0 Lord of Hedonism in 1 second. After advancing to Lord of Hedonism, he seamlessly advanced to Old One Chaos, and then led the Sun God, Little K, Bethel, and others to kill all the outer gods, ushering in a happy and fulfilling ending. Wait, I understand all the principles, but where did Little Red go? Roland suddenly realized something amidst everyone's cheers. His gaze swept over everyone present. There was the Sun God, Little K, Bethel, the Evernight Goddess, and even Antigonus had come to play a minor role, but one person was missing. The former war angel, later god of war, Medici. What Little Red? Bethel cast a puzzled look at him, seemingly not understanding what he was saying. After a brief daze, Roland curled the corners of his mouth and said, so that's it, is this the figure? If the crisis of the time memoir potion was to make Roland experience thousands upon thousands of years with a mortal heart, then the crisis of the figure potion was to weave a sweet dream. If one could not awaken from this dream, they would only fall into eternal oblivion. This falsehood was even difficult to detect, because in a sense, it was also real, a fabricated reality, a timeline that had not yet been chosen. The purpose of the ritual was to leave an unignorable flaw in this reality, to awaken Roland from the dream at a critical moment. And the purpose of the auxiliary material was to grant Roland the power to break free from this falsehood. Although this ending is beautiful, I prefer to achieve it myself. But it also gave me some inspiration, Roland smiled. He raised his hand and snapped his fingers. The false future shattered at this moment, and Roland opened his eyes in reality. You didn't die, right? Medici's voice sounded, carrying easily detectable tension and worry. Roland blinked, turned to look at Medici, and suddenly said with a smile, I just had a dream. Medici motioned for him to explain in detail. I dreamed that you disappeared, and I, having lost a great tool, was overwhelmed with grief, so I decided to destroy the world. Roland said the great truth in the form of nonsense. How is a false world not a world? Medici's mouth twitched. He looked Roland up and down, then suddenly said impatiently, Adam. I am here. Adam, who could always appear from thin air, truly appeared from thin air. Go cure this person's brain, he might be crazy, Medici said impolitely. Adam then smiled and looked at Roland. His golden eyes even seemed somewhat compassionate at this moment. He said, do you need me to provide psychological therapy for you? No thanks, I'm afraid I'd drive you crazy, Roland shook his head and said honestly. His spiritual world was not something ordinary people could explore, and not even an ordinary king of angels could. Adam showed a regretful expression. Apparently, he really wanted to study Roland's psychological experiences. After all, the sun god was originally a researcher. Chapter 480, The Figure's Ability. But with all due respect, every one of the sun god's research endeavors has not turned out well, Roland said bluntly, clearly seeing Adam's confusion. For example, during the third epoch, the sun god's research into the chaos sea resulted in the primordial one awakening within me. And then there's the fourth epoch, where you wanted to study the calamity of destruction, and well, everyone knows how that turned out. Adam was silent for a second, his golden eyes lowered, making his emotions unreadable. However, his hands unconsciously fiddled with the cross ornament hanging from his sleeve, indicating he was quite busy. And as is well known, people often inexplicably become very busy when they are embarrassed. So, as the master of opening blind boxes, you should open fewer of them. Otherwise, I'm truly afraid that one day, you'll open up the end of the world, Roland said, patting Adam's shoulder. It was merely an accident, and the awakening of the primordial one within me was, strictly speaking, inevitable. Adam finally raised his eyes and said with a smile. So do you have any idea why the sun god's work in the research institute directly resulted in the Chaos Sea? Roland asked seriously after perfunctorily nodding. Adam was silent for a second, then suddenly laughed and said, perhaps this is fate, just as the sun god ultimately met you. Perhaps you are the biggest blind box he has opened in this life. Hearing this, Roland raised an eyebrow and said with a smile, then you still have to thank Amon, otherwise I wouldn't have summoned an existence like the sun god right after arriving in this world. You're welcome. I'm very fortunate to be able to serve as this medium. Amon, who usually filled the air, raised his hand to push up the monocle on his face and said, of course, it would be even better if a certain someone could have fewer prejudices and stereotypes about me. No way. Roland spread his hands and said, who told you that the fact you're a mischievous child is too deeply ingrained in people's hearts? I'll take that as a compliment, Amon said, then suddenly changed the topic. Lucifer, now that you have successfully advanced, can you revive the sun god? When he said this, Amon's tone was relatively calm, but only he knew how fast his heart was beating when he asked the question. I can tell you're very anxious. Roland glanced at him, smiled, then looked at the calm-faced Adam and Medici, who was watching him with his arms crossed. He didn't beat around the bush and said straightforwardly, the answer is, of course, yes, but before that, we need to do some preparatory work. The abilities the Figure potion brought Roland were simple. Aside from the strengthening of a series of previous abilities, the core ability of the Figure could be simply summarized as subverting reality and making false destinies descend upon someone or something. Roland's understanding of this was that it was a super-enhanced version of the Miracle Invoker. Just as the Miracle Invoker needed to fulfill others' wishes to accumulate wish power to achieve his own desires, the Figure's core ability also required the accumulation of falsification power to be used. There were two ways to obtain falsification power. First, by changing others' destinies, turning predetermined destinies into falsehoods, and second, by making false existences descend into reality. And with falsification power, Roland could use it to alter reality, such as negating something that had already happened, or weaving a false destiny to descend upon someone, making it a reality. Incidentally, if something that had already happened was negated, it would not create a butterfly effect. It would simply act directly on the person involved in the current timeline, such as directly resurrecting the dead in the present timeline, and so on. At the same time, even if the same event was to be subverted or realized, the falsification power required would differ depending on whether there were preparations or not. This was also why Roland stated that reviving the sun god required prior preparation. Roland was not currently lacking falsification power, as he had changed too many people's destinies since he came to this world, and the Susha Republic itself could be said to be something that should not exist at all. Although it met the second condition, it brought Roland a large amount of falsification power. However, the falsification power needed to revive the sun god was by no means a small amount. The sun god was too powerful, and his revival would bring too great a change to the world. For such an existence, whether Roland negated the fact of his fall or wove a false destiny to directly revive him in this era, a vast amount of falsification power would be required. Although Roland theoretically had enough falsification power to meet this condition, it was naturally better to save a little if possible. After all, there were too many things falsification power could be used for. If he didn't save some, it really wouldn't be enough. Fortunately, Roland had been pondering the matter of reviving the sun god during this period, and he even had a theoretically effective, albeit not yet mature, revival plan in hand. With this premise, if Eternal Blazing Sun, Storm Old Dove, and others contributed their uniqueness and a sequence 1 characteristic, along with the cooperation of True Creator and Adam, Roland could theoretically minimize the consumption of falsification power. This was because, with these preparations, there was theoretically already a considerable possibility of the sun god's return. Therefore, In such circumstances, the figurer would only need a minimal distortion of reality to make the sun god return. Speaking of which, the figurer potion has also been mostly digested. Judging from its name and core ability, digesting the figurer potion probably involves changing others' destinies, making false existences descend into reality, and so on. Looking at it this way, perhaps when I revive the sun god, the potion will be completely digested. Roland pinched his chin, muttering to himself, and then couldn't help but think of the supplementary materials and advancement ritual required for the Son of Chaos potion. The supplementary materials required for the Son of Chaos potion were not abstract. In fact, their description was quite straightforward: the most intense emotion of an old one-level existence towards you. The more intense, the better the effect. If it's just a lukewarm emotion, please be cautious. Roland pondered for a moment. If he only considered the current situation, he might only be able to seek such materials from outer gods. At the very least, his old friends, Mother Tree and Mother Goddess, should hate him quite a bit. How could hatred not be considered an intense emotion? But if he waited a little longer, whether it was for the sun god to revive and advance to God, or for Bethel to advance to Lord of the Mysteries, their emotions towards Roland should also meet the requirements. And the advancement ritual for the Son of Chaos is to change the destiny of at least half the people on a certain continent. Roland couldn't help but raise an eyebrow. For others, the requirements of this ritual would be difficult to achieve, but for Roland, he had already completed it. The moment the war ended, the requirements of this ritual were already perfectly met, even exceeded. Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. And please support the author by link in description. Chapter 481, Sun God's Revival Preparation. Although I wasn't intentionally maintaining the ritual before, the fact is that many of my actions since coming to this world perfectly aligned with the requirements of my later sequences, whether it was the rituals or the digestion of the potions. Roland pondered, stroking his chin. If it were anyone else, they would surely feel an invisible hand manipulating their destiny at this point, but Roland merely couldn't help but exclaim, "Old Brother Bubble is still reliable." It's hard to say whether Yogg had already foreseen this scene when he arranged such rituals and potion digestion requirements. At this rate, I truly might be able to ascend directly to an old one after advancing to sequence 1. Hey, it's practically a tradition of the Lord of Mysteries. Roland couldn't help but chuckle, then looked at Medici and the others who were watching him, and instructed, "Adam, go find the true creator," and then. After instructing Adam, Roland looked at Medici and Amon, and said with a smile, "As for you two, come with me to meet your old colleagues. The upcoming revival of the sun god will require them to contribute something, such as the uniqueness and characteristics that originally belonged to the sun god. The god kingdom of eternal blazing sun. So you can really revive the sun god." After listening to Roland and the others' narration, Eternal Blazing Sun's expression couldn't hide his excitement. Although he had long known that Roland might be able to revive the sun god, it was still up in the air before, and now the situation was clearly different. You can go to the site to see the situation. In fact, you will also be needed there to contribute the characteristics and uniqueness at that time, Roland said with a smile. "No problem, I'm going." Eternal Blazing Sun decided without a second of hesitation. How could he not be present for the sun god's revival? "All right, then come along." Roland nodded, smiling. "Next, we're going to find Old Pigeon and 2-5 Dragon. You can also come with us." Naturally, Eternal Blazing Sun chose to follow. He didn't have complete trust in his other two former colleagues. Although Eternal Blazing Sun himself was willing to offer his uniqueness and characteristics to help revive the sun god, he didn't believe that everyone else would be as willing. If anyone was unwilling, Eternal Blazing Sun expressed that he would be very willing to help Lucifer and Medici use force to suppress them. Thus, the group quickly arrived at the god kingdom of the Lord of Storms. After listening to Roland's words, Storm Old Dove was silent for a few seconds, then let out a long sigh as if a heavy stone had finally fallen. He looked at Roland and directly asked, "How do I strip them away?" Characteristics cannot be stripped away just by wanting to, especially those like uniqueness and sequence 1 characteristics. Stripping characteristics of this level often requires very special methods. There's no need to strip them. Just don't resist when the time comes, and the uniqueness and characteristics will naturally go where they belong, Roland explained with a smile. Storm Old Dove gave Roland a deep look upon hearing this, no longer questioning anything. He nodded, then glanced at Eternal Blazing Sun and asked, "So, next is Haraburgen." The God Kingdom of Knowledge and Wisdom. I almost thought you were attacking. Haraburgen looked at the crowd before him with a wry smile. It was undoubtedly a large group. Besides Roland, Medici, Amon, and Storm and Blaze, there were also Rosal, god of steam and machinery, Evernight goddess, and others who had joined in for the fun. This caused Haraburgen, who was originally researching an ancient book, to suddenly find a vast crowd standing outside his god kingdom, and they were all either angels or true gods. He was so startled that he immediately recalled his recent actions and those of the Knowledge Church, wondering if he had unknowingly committed some taboo. Actually, if you're unwilling to contribute your uniqueness in a sequence 1 characteristic, it won't make a difference, will it? Roland thought for a moment, then said with a smile. Haraburgen's expression immediately became a bit subtle. He looked at the vast crowd of true gods and angels before him, then thought about his own single-handed weakness, and finally honestly said, "To be honest, there is indeed reluctance, but I really can't beat you all." Although he had chosen to follow the Sun God again, it was impossible for Haraburgen not to feel reluctant about the uniqueness and sequence 1 characteristics he had used for so many years. But on one hand, Haraburgen was indeed willing to offer these for the revival of the Sun God, and on the other hand, as he said, even if Haraburgen had truly wavered, facing such a vast crowd, that wavering thought was completely extinguished. "I know, which is why I didn't stop them from coming with me," Roland said with a smile, not hiding his intentions at all. "After all, I still don't want to become enemies with you. Because the Knowledge Church's wool is really good." Haraburgen couldn't help but joke. "Exactly." Roland nodded, then earnestly reached out and patted Haraburgen's shoulder, saying, "Old Her, you should also know how short the Republic is on people right now. You still need to guard the opening to the astral world here, and it's inconvenient to go to the real world, but after you're no longer Sequence 0, why don't you consider working for the Republic? The Republic is truly short on people right now, especially after liberating countries like Intis. The demand for talent has directly doubled." It's worth mentioning here that Roland actually didn't force countries like Intis to join the Republic. After all, he wasn't interested in being the ruler of the world, and forcibly integrating countries with different cultures, customs, and languages might not necessarily be a good thing. Liberating these countries is one thing, annexing them is another. So, after countries like Intis were liberated, Roland gave the local rebel armies in these countries 2 choices. The first, naturally, was to merge into the Republic and become a part of the Susha Republic. The second was to elect their own rulers. Of course, to avoid situations where the Dragon Slayer becomes a dragon, Roland would exercise a certain degree of oversight over these rulers and their subsequent rule to ensure they wouldn't become new nobles. Of course, for countries that chose the first option, Roland would treat them the same as Loan and provide the greatest possible support. As for countries that chose the second option, Roland would also provide some support, at least ensuring that no one starved to death in their country, but they shouldn't expect anything more than that. At least Roland had no interest in being a babysitter for unrelated people his entire life. As for whether Saussure and the others would secretly provide aid, that was their business. Currently, countries like Lindbergh and Fasak have already chosen to join the Republic, while Intis and Fosak have not yet made a decision. There seems to be significant disagreement within them, and a result may not be reached in the short term. Chapter 482, Return of the Sun God Part 1. Haraburgen's expression grew even more subtle when he heard Roland's words. A few seconds later, he said tactfully, "Perhaps you recall that I serve the Sun God. It's fine, you can be temporarily assigned." "The Sun God wouldn't refuse such a good deed for the nation and its people," Roland said with a smile. Haraburgen fell silent again. He suppressed the urge to sigh and said, "If the Sun God agrees, then I naturally have no objections." Roland's smile became genuinely warmer, showing that he had indeed been thinking of poaching the old dragon for a long time. After negotiating with the 3 gods, Roland sent the others to the forsaken land of the gods to find the true creator, while he himself returned to Backland to gather Saussure, Little K, Ask, and others. After all, the resurrection of the sun god was a major event that happened only once in several millennia. It would be too regrettable to miss such excitement. Subsequently, Roland arrived in the forsaken land of the gods, where the true creator was located. Everything had been arranged as Roland requested. Besides Adam and the true creator, Will and Ouroboros were also waiting there early. "Oh, you're all here." Roland greeted them with a smile, then looked at Will teasingly. "This time, you finally remembered to invite me to watch the show." Roland had specifically instructed Adam to call Will. "It's a good thing you didn't forget, otherwise I might be the last sequence one in the whole world to know about the sun god's resurrection," Will said, half complaining and half joking. It was evident that he held a strong grudge about being forgotten by Roland during the previous excitements. Roland first showed a slightly apologetic smile, but then he revealed his true intentions, stating righteously, "Sorry, but whose fault is it that your presence is really too low? I don't think you can blame me, you should reflect on why your presence is not as strong as others." Will gnashed his teeth, puffing out his cheeks like a hamster in anger. Then, still in the form of a child, he fully utilized his appearance advantage and burst into tears with a wail. Roland was stunned by the sight. He looked at Will in disbelief and couldn't help but say, "No, you're crying even in front of so many people. You really have no shame. Everyone here knows each other, I've long since lost face with them," Will said between sobs, his words making one wonder whether he was self-aware or just pathetic. Seeing Will cry louder and louder, showing signs of a spoiled child acting out, Roland could only harden his heart and start coaxing the child under everyone's gaze. "Don't cry, it's my fault. How about I make you ice cream for a month? At least half a year." Will immediately made an exorbitant demand. "No, half a year is too much. 3 months at most," Roland cut the price in half directly. 5 months, Will backed down slightly. 2.5 months, Roland blinked, continuing to cut the price in half. Will choked on his crying. He glared at Roland before saying, 3 months it is. Deal." Roland nodded directly. Thus, Will, who had just been crying as if he would pass out, instantly stopped crying, and his tears dried, demonstrating perfect control. He then pulled out a handkerchief from somewhere and wiped his face clean. If not for the slight redness around his eyes, he looked completely unlike someone who had just cried. Terrifying. Roland shook his head, then thought of something else and said, "Will, how about you go to the North and South continent for a change of scenery and play for a while? Consider it a vacation." The main reason Roland suddenly brought this up was that he felt Will seemed to be getting more and more abnormal. Although the previous Will also didn't pay much attention to his image, Roland felt it hadn't reached this point. Perhaps he had truly stayed in Frank's laboratory for too long, leading to his abnormality. After all, Frank had created many things that were truly, very sanity-draining. "You'd be so kind." Will looked at him suspiciously. "Of course, I've always been a good boss," Roland said with a smile, offering no further explanation. After a small interlude, Roland looked at Adam and the true creator, extending his hands to both of them and saying, "Then, please give me your hands, so I can save a file for you first." After advancing to Figure, the time memory ability naturally underwent some changes, allowing for more detailed selection of archived content, such as power or personality. So now, Roland could use the archiving ability to extract the personalities of these two separately after the sun god's resurrection. This would not affect the sun god's resurrection. Adam and the true creator both extended their hands without hesitation. Adam added a reminder, "Everything takes precedence over the sun god's resurrection. Although I also wish to survive, if it's impossible, there's no need to force it." "Stop, don't jinx it for me. Don't you know words like that are very unlucky?" Roland glared at Adam unhappily, not responding to his words, but simply and decisively archived the personalities of Adam and the true creator separately. Next, Roland checked the ritual he had asked Adam and the sun god to arrange. This was an inspiration he gained after learning from God, an incomplete resurrection ritual. Theoretically, Roland could already attempt to resurrect the sun god with this ritual, but it wasn't safe and had significant flaws, which was why Roland insisted on waiting until he advanced to Figure before resurrecting the sun god. After confirming the ritual was correct, Roland looked at Eternal Blazing Sun, Lord of Storms, and the God of Wisdom and Knowledge. He made a gesturing motion to the three gods, pointing to the 3 auxiliary positions in the ritual array, and said, "Please stand here, all 3 of you." The 3 gods exchanged glances. Not one of them hesitated, and they all followed Roland's instructions. Roland then directed Adam and the true creator to stand in the other 2 positions. Roland himself stood at the main position of the ritual array. After some operations, he activated the power of the ritual formation, and at the moment the ritual began, a pen appeared in Roland's hand. He held the pen and wrote in the void. In the first year of the Republic, through the resurrection ritual presided over by Lucifer, sun god Grisha was perfectly resurrected. After writing this passage, the pen in Roland's hand disappeared, and at the same time, his power of falsification rapidly depleted. A phantom shadow outlined itself from the air, from blurry to clear, gradually taking on the familiar appearance of Roland and the others, only this body showed no signs of life, as if it were merely a perpetually sleeping shell. The next second, Adam and the true creator transformed into dazzling white light and entered the body. As if by a miracle, the body began to breathe, its eyelids trembled, seeming ready to open at any moment. Chapter 483, The Sun God Returns Part 2. But this was not the end, because Eternal Blazing Sun and the others all felt something being peeled away from them at this moment. The next second, several beams of light projected from their bodies, and these beams also merged into the Sun God's body. The Sun God's aura seemed to change at this moment, a power beyond sequence 0 gathered within him, forming a part of his resurrection. Everyone grew tense at this moment, and under their gaze, a dazzling golden light suddenly illuminated from the Sun God, lighting up the entire forsaken land of the gods, bringing a true sun to this place that rarely received sunlight in most situations. Just like many, many years ago, when this world was still only darkness without light, the Sun God, who emerged from Chernobyl, similarly brought light and warmth, and the sun, to the dark world. Perhaps a few seconds passed, or perhaps an even longer time, before the light from the Sun God gradually dimmed, but this was not a disappearance, for the entire forsaken land of the gods remained enveloped in light. And at the moment the Sun God completely stopped emitting light, he opened his eyes. "Father." Amon looked at those familiar eyes and couldn't help but call out. The Sun God was clearly a bit confused, but this confusion did not last too long. After about a few seconds, the confusion in his eyes disappeared, replaced by a familiar gentleness. The Sun God looked at Amon, nodded, and seemed to sigh, saying, "It's me. I'm here, Amon." It was hard to describe Amon's feelings at this moment. He clenched his fists, a fierce emotion echoing in his heart. Rarely, Amon didn't even know what he should do at this moment. Should he give his father a hug? Or, before Amon could come to a conclusion, he felt a shadow fall over him. It was the Sun God, who had somehow already walked in front of him. The Sun God gave Amon a hug, just like every father reunited with his child after a long separation. At this moment, he was no longer the savior, no longer the half-god, but simply a father who had been separated from his child for too long. No one present spoke, they all silently watched the scene before them. Even Roland chose not to disturb the father and son. Regardless, genuine familial affection is always worth marveling at. However, the Sun God did not embrace Amon for too long. He quickly released his child, then reached out and rubbed the other's head, before saying with a sigh, "You've grown up." "I grew up a long time ago, father," Amon said, pursing his lips. "I know. I've been absent for too long. Although true creator and Adam accompanied you, they are not the complete me after all, and you don't recognize them," the Sun God said, sighing again. He had more or less some regrets about missing Amon's growth. Perhaps even more regrettable was that the mischievous child he could barely tolerate before his fall had, after his fall, ultimately gone astray. Fortunately, he had now been set straight again. Thinking of this, the Sun God looked at Roland, his expression filled with emotion, saying, "I didn't expect you to truly do it. You are indeed the one who brings miracles, Lucifer. So trust me a little more, Grisha. I'm probably more trustworthy than you imagine." Roland smiled, then thought of something and asked curiously, "What's your current situation? Is your self-awareness still good?" The Sun God did not answer immediately upon hearing this, but first organized his words before saying, "My current self-awareness is indeed my complete state, but I also possess the memories of true creator and Adam, as well as some of their emotions, but these do not dominate me. At the same time, I also have my own original memories, and memories related to you. Roland nodded, then asked, what about God? What is his current state? God still exists, but he is much weaker than when I was alive. The current me can suppress him. The sun god had no intention of hiding anything. God's will would not disappear due to his resurrection, but as time passed, such ancient consciousnesses would naturally become weaker and weaker. Just as in the fourth epoch, once a Go-3 family member advanced to Lord of the Mysteries, they would immediately be replaced by Celestial Worthy. However, in the fifth epoch, those who advanced could contend with Celestial Worthy. Therefore, after resurrecting in this era, the will of God within the sun god's body was naturally weakened to the extreme. After listening to him, Roland asked, then do you have the confidence to advance to God now? The sun god was silent for a second, then he revealed a gentle smile and said, I think I can try. His gaze swept over everyone present, lingering on Medici and the others for a moment, then looking into the distance, in the direction of the North and South continent. I will win, for this world, for all the people I care about, for those who have already fought for freedom and equality. The sun god looked at Roland, his tone firm, saying, they have already welcomed a good life, and I will not allow this life to be broken by outsiders. They deserve to live happily and continue to be happy. It's just like you. Roland was not surprised, but still couldn't help but feel a little emotional. He looked at the sun god before him and smiled again, saying, then go do it. Don't worry, although it's a bit difficult, theoretically, even if you lose, I can still pull you out again. Roland did not offer to help the sun god fight God, because this would be a long process. Even if Roland temporarily used the power of fictionalization to help the sun god suppress God, it would not be a long-term solution. As for directly erasing God's existence, the power of fictionalization required would be too immense. At least Roland did not possess it yet, and it was hard to say for the future. So, becoming God, in the end, still depended on the sun god himself. Thank you. The sun god met Roland's gaze, saying sincerely. He paused, then suddenly revealed a smile, and said seriously. But I will still be wary of you. You are good, but you are also very mad. I trust your humanity, but I don't trust that madness that pulls you down. So I will always be wary of you. That's not a bad thing. After all, I don't really trust that madness that pulls me down either. Roland said with a smile after a second of silence. He continued, but before that, let's resurrect True Creator and Adam. This probably requires your cooperation. At least cut out 2 shells first. There's no need for souls, I can directly resurrect them on the bodies. The sun god naturally had no objection to this. He completely didn't mind multiple versions of him existing in this world. After all, the sun god himself was a master of self-slicing. So, with their cooperation, True Creator and Adam soon returned to this world, except one regressed to the level of an king of angels, and the other simply became a sequence 1. This was because the sun god's resurrection was centered on the spectator pathway's sequence 0, as this was what truly fit the definition of a perfect resurrection. Therefore, True Creator could still be an king of angels with 2 sequence 1 characteristics, while Adam could truly only be a sequence 1. This was also thanks to the unique nature of the spectator sequence, which could conceptualize a sequence 1 characteristic. Chapter 484, Demon Lord. Although he spoke with great confidence, as someone whose bones were etched with caution, the sun god did not immediately attempt to ascend to God after his resurrection. In fact, before attempting to ascend, the sun god first spent some time making arrangements, ensuring that even if another accident were to occur, things would not spiral into the worst possible situation. And since the sun god had been resurrected, resurrecting Saussure naturally became a feasible matter for Roland. After all, the ready-made synthesis materials, the sun god and the True Creator, were right there, and with the experience of the sun god's resurrection, Roland quickly followed suit and resurrected Saussure. However, because the sequence 1 characteristic was with the True Creator, Saussure was only at sequence 2 level after his resurrection. Roland didn't care about this. After all, he didn't value Saussure's sequence. What he valued had always been the Heavenly Kingdom Vice Monarch's excellent ability to handle official business. After completing these tasks, while the sun god prepared for his ascension, Roland took the time to visit Farbati. At that time, the demon lord was holed up in his lair, his aura unstable, clearly in a very poor state. You're here. Farbati looked up at Roland, his gaze then falling on Medici, who appeared casual but was actually vigilant beside Roland. He wasn't surprised, just curved his lips and said, I heard the sun god has been resurrected. Medici, I'm truly surprised you didn't continue to revolve around that savior. The commotion of the sun god's resurrection was not small, so it naturally wasn't a secret. Medici glanced at him, and as soon as he spoke, it was with his usual sarcastic tone. I'm more surprised that you're still alive, Farbati. I thought you died thousands of years ago. Clearly, the relationship between Medici and Farbati was not good. No choice, I'm lucky, I managed to survive until now, unlike you. You died once and were still able to find a backer and take off again. Farbati's tone was quite emotional when he said this, which wasn't entirely sarcasm. In fact, he really hadn't expected to see Medici become a god one day. What, jealous? Medici crossed his arms, his tone more or less tinged with smugness. Not at all. Farbati shook his head, his gaze returning to Roland. After meeting those eyes that were clearly watching the show, he said very directly, actually, I don't believe you. Normal. Roland nodded, not at all surprised, and said with a smile, after all, I know what my essence is, so it's perfectly normal for you not to believe me. Farbati clearly hadn't expected Roland to be so frank. He paused, then continued, but everyone else has chosen to believe you. The sun god, Mr. Dor, the Evernight goddess. Farbati listed the names, and finally looked at Roland, saying, although I don't get along with them, I know very well what kind of people they are. They have chosen to believe you, and I can only hope their choice is correct and won't drag this world into another abyss. Roland chuckled at this, looking at Farbati and asking with interest, what if they're wrong? Farbati met his gaze and said, they will pay the price for their mistakes, they will spare no effort to rectify their mistakes. And I. Farbati curved his lips at this point, his smile a bit arrogant, a bit crazy, as he said, I'll probably choose to give you a big one. Although that might not severely injure you, at least I tried. Good mental state, keep it up. Roland chuckled softly, looking at Farbati and saying, but there's no need to save your big move for me. I'm a good kid who never destroys the world. Farbati remained noncommittal. I probably know what kind of person you are. Someone like you probably wouldn't work for me just to save your own life. Roland continued with a smile, fortunately, I occasionally don't mind doing some charity. Even if you're unwilling to work for me, I'm still willing to help you out. No thanks, what's free is the most expensive. I understand that principle, just name your price. Farbati shook his head, looking at Roland. So cautious. Roland glanced at him, not caring about his attitude, and said with a smile, all right, since you don't want free treatment, then I'll state my conditions. Roland met Farbati's gaze and said, severely injure an outer god, how about that? Farbati frowned. He didn't think the task was too difficult, but rather because the condition Roland proposed was exactly what he had already planned to do. Don't overthink it, there's nothing on you worth me coveting. The only thing that catches my eye is probably your determination to give an outer god a big one. Roland said with a smile. So, consider it an investment I'm making so you can better severely injure an outer god. Farbati looked at him deeply, finally no longer refusing, only saying, how will you help me? When it came to cleaning up outer god corruption, Roland was undoubtedly an old hand, and he quickly resolved the mother tree corruption on Farbati. And after the corruption was resolved, Farbati, who was receiving this kind of treatment for the first time, was silent for a long time before suddenly saying, I originally thought that if they lost the gamble, this world would still have a chance. Now I realize that if they truly trusted the wrong person, this world would probably have no chance at all. Clearly, Farbati had sensed some of the essence of Roland's treatment, such as the treated person being able to be manipulated by Roland to a certain extent. Be confident, even without this, you wouldn't win. Destroying the world is a simple matter for me. Roland said something astonishing with a smile, then continued. But be grateful that their efforts have paid off. I've already invested too much emotion in this world, so you won't lose. After dealing with Farbati, Roland suddenly found himself with nothing to do. After all, many things had already been resolved, and he couldn't help with the rest. Yet everyone else was very busy and had no time to entertain Roland. As for going to the Republic to work overtime with Saussure, no thanks. Roland was just idle, not out of his mind. So, bored out of his mind, while his main body continued to research the power of outer gods and his main account read books to fill his knowledge, Roland decided to use a small account to harass the celestial master on the western continent. The sun god has been resurrected by my teacher. I wonder if you all have any sensing there. Roland wrote this on the bamboo slip. The western continent did not reply immediately, but after a while, a response came. We do have some sensing here. I never expected such a fortunate event. Your teacher's action is truly a joy for the common people, with immeasurable merit. Roland curved his lips and continued to write. If nothing unexpected happens, Bethel will soon ascend to Lord of the Mysteries, and the sun god will become a true god. At that time, we might initiate the decisive battle with the outer gods ahead of schedule. How are your preparations going over there? The western continent might have been surprised by the amount of information in Roland's words, or perhaps they were organizing their language, as they did not reply immediately. After a long while, they said, if God and the Lord of the Mysteries truly emerge, we can cooperate with you to start the war early at any time. Clearly, the western continent was also constantly preparing for the apocalypse. Chapter 485, Lord of the Mysteries Grand Finals. Roland couldn't help but smile as he looked at the reply on the bamboo slip. He continued to write, then get ready. When the time is right, I will notify you. It won't be long, perhaps within a few years. After finishing this sentence, Roland closed the bamboo slip, stretched, and then looked up at the sky. It was daytime, and Roland could only see the blue sky, white clouds, and a scorching sun. He couldn't see anything else. The Figure potion has been almost completely digested after I resurrected the sun god. Now, only the auxiliary materials are left, Roland muttered to himself, starting to ponder whether he should try to acquire the mother tree and mother god's hatred towards him. But both of them were in the starry sky. Roland wasn't afraid of encountering one of them individually, but he was afraid of being besieged by outer gods after going to the starry sky. Just then, Roland's phone rang. It was a gadget Rosal had fiddled with, and for convenience of communication, Roland carried one with him. Roland took out his phone and saw that the caller ID showed Amon. Why is this brat calling for no reason? Roland raised an eyebrow, answered the call, and heard Amon on the other end say, Jack, hurry over to the Abraham family's side. My main body is going to challenge Bethel, and he's about to get beaten up. Roland's eyes lit up instantly. Without hesitation, he immediately had Lucifer's main account use the power of travel, bringing both accounts to the Abraham family's base. Sure enough, he saw Amon's main body. Not only was Amon there, but Antigonus was also present. However, unlike the imagined scene of Amon getting beaten, in reality, these three were playing cards, and they had even pulled in Little K, who had appeared there for some unknown reason but was also playing cards. What exactly happened? Roland, in Jack's disguise, ran to Amon's side and asked. It's like this morning, my main body went crazy for some unknown reason and suddenly decided to have a showdown with Bethel. Not only that, he also pulled Antigonus along, Amon explained in a low voice, his tone turning a bit disappointed at the end. I originally thought he was going to get beaten up, but I didn't expect my main body to suddenly declare that everyone was friends and that fighting was bad. In the end, he pulled out a deck of cards and said that they would decide the winner with a card game, and whoever won would become Lord of the Mysteries. Did Bethel agree? Roland raised an eyebrow, not commenting on this absurd situation, but instead asked. He didn't agree at first, but my main body said that if Bethel didn't agree, he would hang himself at the Abraham family's doorstep. Amon spread his hands and said. Ah. Roland was stunned for a moment, then thought about it and said seriously, isn't that a good thing? I thought so too, but my main body also said that he wouldn't just hang himself at the Abraham family's doorstep, but also hire dozens or hundreds of writers to compile their story into a beautiful romance to be sung for generations. Amon sighed at this point and said, then Bethel agreed, probably feeling he couldn't afford to lose face. Roland. Awesome. Perhaps this is what it means to be invincible when you have no shame. Bethel still suffered from being too concerned with his reputation. As Roland mused, the account wearing Lucifer's disguise went over to watch the card game. After watching for a while, he realized that it was indeed a card game among 4 Go3 family members, and it was incredibly exciting. Whether it was Amon stealing or Antigonus's grafting, both were used with masterful skill, along with various other small tricks. And as the only Sequence 0 present, Mr. Door, who had initially accommodated Saphira Castle and could be called a true god among true gods, calmly suppressed his 2 colleagues with 1 against 2, even having enough energy to help little K, who was only Sequence 4. I heard the final battle for the Lord of the Mysteries is about to begin. I didn't miss it, did I? Rosal emerged from the spirit world, looking like he enjoyed a good show, clearly afraid of missing out on some great fun. The god of steam and machinery followed closely behind Rosal, clearly having set off with him. Nope, they're playing. Roland glanced at Rosal, raised a hand, and pointed at the heated card game that had just started, saying, "Ah, playing cards." Rosal was dumbfounded. He then looked at Amon and asked, "No, buddy, didn't you say the Lord of the Mysteries competition had started? Why is it a card game?" "Yes, it has started." Amon nodded, stating naturally, they are currently competing for the position of Lord of the Mysteries. Whoever wins this card game becomes Lord of the Mysteries. Huh. A question mark slowly appeared above Rosal's head. He said with some disbelief, "Isn't this a bit too childish?" Actually, not really. After all, the candidate was already decided internally. Even if everyone fought with real blades, facing Bethel, who has Saphira Castle, it would just be a matter of getting beaten once or twice. Roland, however, held a different opinion and said, "Thinking about it this way, resolving it with a card game isn't bad either." Rosal pondered it and realized that it indeed made sense. If the position of Lord of the Mysteries hadn't been decided internally, everyone would definitely fight to the death. But now it was clear that Lucifer supported Bethel as Lord of the Mysteries, if not Bethel, then Xiao Zhou. Amon and Antigonus never had a chance from beginning to end. So, instead of going up to get beaten, it was better for everyone to gather and play cards, resolving the matter peacefully. This way, at least Amon could avoid one beating. Tisk, fine, I guess, it just means less excitement to watch. Rosal clicked his tongue, shook his head, and then, also interested, joined the card table, beginning to watch the highest existences of the Go3 family duel. Rosal's arrival was just the beginning. Subsequently, many people Roland was familiar with arrived at the Abraham family's base one after another. Some were incarnations, like the Evernight goddess, while others came in their main bodies, like the sun god. It was evident that everyone was very concerned about the Lord of the Mysteries competition. Upon discovering that the competition had turned into a card game, although some people were disappointed, most still chose to stay and watch the game. After all, from a technical standpoint, Bethel and the others could be called incredibly skilled players, making the game highly enjoyable to watch. By the time the card game was nearing its end, the small Abraham family base had gathered almost all of Earth's high-end combat power. "I won." Bethel laid down his cards, announcing the result. He looked at Amon, then at Antigonus, and said with a polite yet authoritative smile, "Or, do you still wish to continue?" Amon also laid down his cards. He seemed to sigh, then suddenly smiled and said, "Yes, you won, a complete victory." After a pause, Amon said, "So, considering our colleague status, can you leave me a Sequence 1 characteristic?" Chapter 486, Bethel promotes to Lord of the Mysteries. Bethel becoming the Lord of the Mysteries did not require all the characteristics of the Marauder pathway. Theoretically, Amon could indeed retain one Sequence 1 characteristic. Bethel did not answer, but first looked back at Roland beside him. After seeing Roland nod slightly, he looked at Amon and said, "Yes." "Thank you," Amon said, also looking at Roland. "Wait, what about me?" Antigonus couldn't help but ask, "I should also be able to retain one Sequence 1 characteristic, right?" Bethel smiled upon hearing this. This time, he did not seek Roland's opinion again, because he knew very well Roland's attitude towards Antigonus, so he nodded and said, "Of course." Antigonus was visibly relieved. "Are you going to promote now, Bethel?" Roland seemed to understand something and asked Bethel. Bethel did not hide anything and nodded, "Yes, there are still about 10 years until the apocalypse. If there are any problems with my promotion, I can make up for them in time, and at worst." He glanced at Little K next to him and said, "I can also hand over in time." Little K pursed his lips. He obviously wanted to say something, but in the end, he said nothing. Bethel continued to look at Roland, smiling. It will be too late if we wait until the apocalypse is near, so please allow me to be a little willful, Your Majesty. Roland pursed his lips. He gazed at Bethel and finally smiled, saying, good. Bethel then also smiled. Bethel's promotion to Lord of the Mysteries did not cause much commotion. After all, he didn't have to fight Amon to the death like in the original story, nor did it trigger a war among the gods. But this does not mean that Bethel's promotion to Lord of the Mysteries would be easier. No one is at ease at this step. The difference between mortals and the celestial venerable in terms of soul essence is too great, so great that anyone who wants to promote must exert all their strength. And for everyone else besides Bethel, this was a somewhat long wait. Perhaps from a purely temporal scale, this period was not long, but waiting always makes people feel that time stretches infinitely. Fortunately, no matter how long the wait, at a certain moment, it finally came to an end. When Bethel left the Saphira castle and returned to the real world, he was met with pairs of eyes staring straight at him. This made him pause, then he curled his lips and said, do I need to prove my identity? That's not necessary. Roland shook his head. He could still distinguish whether the person in front of him was Bethel himself. Roland merely surveyed Bethel in front of him. Compared to before, aside from becoming more powerful in aura, Bethel's condition had visibly worsened significantly. Are you okay? Roland couldn't help but ask. I'm fine, I'm just arguing with the celestial venerable in my head and need to be a bit distracted, Bethel said, making it unclear whether he was joking or telling the truth. He raised his hand and rubbed his temples, then looked at Roland, giving him a smile and saying, I won the first step. I am now the Lord of the Mysteries. Perhaps I will lose to him later, but at least for now, I am the winner. As soon as these words came out, not only Roland but many people present breathed a sigh of relief. Bethel then thought of something else, showing a strange expression. After hesitating for a while, he looked at Roland and said, speaking of which, I don't know if it's my illusion, but I always feel that the celestial venerable is not very active. Tell me about it. Roland's mood instantly lifted, and he asked, how should I put it? Bethel organized his words before saying, it's probably a feeling. I am now in a symbiotic relationship with the celestial venerable in some sense, so I can vaguely perceive some of his emotions. The celestial venerable seems not particularly keen on returning. As he said this, Bethel glanced at Roland several times, making it very obvious. Roland naturally received this hint. He raised an eyebrow, pointed to himself, and said, does he think I'll do something to him? Won't you? Bethel asked sincerely. Don't tell me, I actually will. Roland answered quite frankly. After a little thought, he understood why the celestial venerable was not very enthusiastic about returning. After all, with him, Nyarlathotep, it's really hard to say whether the celestial venerable's true return would be good or bad for him. From this point of view, it would be better to let Mr. Door take the lead first. Anyway, an existence like the celestial venerable is immortal as long as he doesn't encounter Roland, so he can completely afford to wait. If he really angered Roland, that would be an unbearable outcome for the celestial venerable. As expected of the pinnacle of the Go-3 family, truly very, go, Roland muttered, stroking his chin. He then looked at Bethel and said, but even if the celestial venerable's attitude towards the struggle isn't active, it's still not easy for you, right? At least it's bearable. Bethel did not deny it. For an existence like the celestial venerable, as long as he doesn't completely disappear, even if his attitude towards the struggle isn't active, it will still have a great impact on the promoter. Not to mention, the inherent divinity and madness of the Lord of the Mysteries itself are still things Bethel needs to fight against. This world is like this. To gain power, to climb to the pinnacle, there is no easy path, it must be full of thorns. Roland scrutinized him up and down, and after confirming that Bethel was telling the truth, he nodded and suddenly said, Bethel, do you mind if I copy your feelings for me? Bethel was startled. Although he didn't understand why, he still nodded and said, with the greatest pleasure, Your Majesty. After obtaining the auxiliary materials for concocting the Son of Chaos potion, Roland did not rush to promote. Instead, he chose an auspicious day, then, basking in the warm sun, he prepared the Son of Chaos potion. Unlike the flamboyant and colorful potions before, the Son of Chaos potion looked very ordinary, like a plain cup of bitter coffee. Is this a return to simplicity? Roland couldn't help but quip, then quickly burst into laughter. He raised his hand in a toasting gesture to the sky, and the next second, he drank the Son of Chaos potion in one gulp. The Son of Chaos potion was neither as bitter as the Time Rememberer nor as sweet as the Figurer. In fact, this potion could be described as utterly bland, like a glass of plain water, tasteless. But the impact it brought to Roland was no less than any previous potion. In fact, Roland found it difficult to describe this impact. For a moment, he even felt as if he had completely lost his form, transforming into ubiquitous air. Yet, in the next second, Roland felt that all things in this world seemed to be him, and countless versions of him opened their eyes, gazing at this silent world. It wasn't until intense emotions surged from his heart, emotions from the pillar most deeply connected to this world, that Roland was instantly pulled back from this impact. And the changed destinies of billions of people at this moment became the most solid anchor, allowing Roland to completely stabilize himself amidst the madness brought by the potion. When Roland opened his eyes again, he was already a genuine Son of Chaos. Chapter 487, The Lord of Pleasure's Request. As I thought, the Son of Chaos potion was digested directly. Roland exhaled, unsurprised. Compared to the digestion progress of the Son of Chaos potion, he was actually more concerned about something else. The Lord of Pleasure's promotion ritual is to personally facilitate the birth of an old one, with an auxiliary material being a book that records all my stories in this world, including the impressions and evaluations of me from everyone related to me in this world. As for Old One Chaos, there is no ritual, it will synchronize and promote to Chaos after I promote to the Lord of Pleasure. Thinking of this, Roland flipped his hand, and Mr. Lucifer's ancient book appeared in his grasp. This ancient book was originally a prop he used to perfect Mr. Lucifer's persona, but later, Roland did indeed record many things on it, including his various sights and sounds. It could be said that this book recorded most of Roland's stories in this world, now it only needed further refinement. And besides that, naturally, it was to have others write their impressions and evaluations of him on it. It almost makes me feel a bit embarrassed, Roland couldn't help but chuckle. He then hummed a tune and stood up. His first step was to find Little K, who was helping Bethel with his work. My impression and evaluation of Mr. Lucifer. Little K was clearly stunned for a moment, he said. Yes, and your impression and evaluation of Jack. They all need to be written on this. Roland smiled and nodded, handing the pen and the ancient book to Little K, while also saying, this is very important. Little K was clearly confused, but he knew that Mr. Lucifer would never mislead him on such matters. So, despite his confusion, Little K's expression became serious, and after thinking for a while, he picked up the pen and began to write. Roland waited for him for a while, and after Little K finished writing, he picked up the notebook and glanced at it, then read aloud with a smile, the best teacher, mysterious and powerful, very protective but a bit double standard. Little K couldn't help but cough, whispering, it's Mr. Lucifer, you said you wanted to hear the most honest evaluation. Don't worry, I'm not angry. Roland smiled and shook his head, then looked at Little K's evaluation of Jack. Unlike the relatively formal impression and evaluation of Mr. Lucifer, Little K's evaluation of Jack was much more lifelike. Best friend, seemingly sweet and innocent, but actually cunning, and so on, filling more than half a page, interspersed with some complaints and some evaluations clearly tinged with resentment. For example, Jack likes to gossip about others and write fanfiction, and while I respect personal hobbies, this is really not good. I can tell, you really have deep resentment towards fanfiction. Roland smiled and said. Little K, however, lowered his head, quietly looking at the patterns on the table. This table is really a table. What's going on? Just then, Bethel returned. He immediately noticed the somewhat strange atmosphere and couldn't help but ask. Nothing. Roland shook his head, then looked at Bethel and said, but you've come at just the right time. Then Roland explained his request. Impressions and evaluations, Bethel pursed his lips. He held the pen Roland handed him, deliberated for several seconds, then picked up the pen and wrote, the best boss. Bethel didn't write much, only a few lines. Roland glanced at it and said, open black lens bracket a soft-hearted child close black lens bracket. Bethel, you're still treating me like a child. Bethel smiled but said nothing, looking up at the ceiling. This ceiling is really a ceiling. Roland looked at the two feigning ignorance, shook his head, and didn't really bother with them. Instead, he quickly found Medici. You sure you want me to write? Medici held the pen, glancing at Roland, his smile as sarcastic as ever. Don't blame me if you cry. Don't worry, I definitely won't blame you. Roland smiled at him and said, and I don't think my heart is that fragile. HMPH. Medici chuckled, then paused before picking up the pen and writing in the ancient book. A little monster worth my loyalty, a trustworthy friend. After writing, he threw the pen and the ancient book into Roland's arms, clapped his hands, and said, Get lost, don't interfere with my work here. That's it. Roland naturally saw what Medici had written, and precisely because of that, he was certain that the other party had only written 2 sentences, or rather, just 1 sentence. What else do you want? Medici glanced at him, then suddenly curled his lips and said, Isn't that enough? I haven't recognized many friends in my life, and even fewer objects of loyalty. Roland raised an eyebrow. He suddenly smiled too, saying, You're right. When you put it that way, it's certainly enough. So what exactly is this for? Medici asked. Just preparing for the final promotion. Roland didn't hide anything, saying with a smile. Medici frowned slightly upon hearing this. He paused, then asked, No problems. Don't worry, I'm confident. Roland replied with a smile, then said, All right, I still need to collect others' impressions and evaluations of me, so I won't stay long. Tisk. Medici watched his figure disappear, letting out a tisk, not knowing what he was thinking. Roland then visited everyone he knew one by one, collecting their evaluations and impressions of him. Finally, he arrived at the forsaken land of the gods and visited the sun god, who was recontaining the Chaos Sea. You look to be in good condition. Roland scrutinized the sun god, finally giving his assessment. Perhaps it's because Messiah is assisting. The sun god smiled gently. He looked at Roland and asked, So, is there something you need? Roland immediately explained the matter. The sun god glanced at him upon hearing this, reached out, took the pen and the ancient book, and wrote, The biggest blind box I opened, a miracle of this world, a monster that must always be vigilant against. Roland watched him write, observing the contradictory evaluations, and couldn't help but say, You look like you're suffering from multiple personality disorder. Trusting you is out of personal emotion, being vigilant against you is out of my rationality. The sun god replied faintly. He then smiled gently, handed the pen and the ancient book back to Roland, and asked, Are you going to take the final step? He didn't think Roland would collect these for no reason. More or less. Roland didn't deny it. After putting away the ancient book, he looked at the sun god and asked, What about you? Probably similar. The sun god smiled gently, pointing to his head and saying, with rare playfulness, I'm arguing with God. If I win, I'll be the new god. Roland was not surprised by this, only smiling and saying, Then I'll see you tomorrow, Grisha. I hope by then, we can both become old ones. See you tomorrow, Roland. The sun god watched the young man before him, responding softly. May you never fall. Chapter 488. What do you want to do after the apocalypse ends? Roland had once fallen, back when he was a pure Nyarlathotep. But a passing Yogg picked up the fallen little Naya, pieced him back together, and for some unknown reason, chose to pull Roland out of the abyss, then taught him how to avoid falling. And so, later, after severing ties with the Nyarlathotep main unit and embarking on his journey, Roland never fell again. So, facing Sun God's blessing, Roland smiled and accepted it calmly. He returned to the familiar backland, to the familiar villa, carrying the booklet that recorded the stories of all his friends in this world. The villa was naturally empty now, as everyone was busy with their own affairs. Roland was not in a hurry to advance. Instead, he leisurely cleaned the house, brewed himself some black tea, and then sat down at his desk with the tea. At the beginning of the story, poor Roland encountered an Amon. Roland took a sip of black tea, then picked up his pen and unhurriedly began to complete his story in the ancient book. He didn't write very fast. As he wrote, he suddenly felt some movement downstairs. Roland raised an eyebrow. He, in his Mr. Lucifer disguise, continued to write the story, while he, in his Jack disguise, ran downstairs with a thud. He immediately saw Medici busy in the kitchen, and Amon standing at the kitchen doorway, clearly ordering dishes, and little K struggling with coffee beans. "Why are you here?" Roland's gaze swept over them, and he asked, puzzled. "Coming home to see, is that not allowed?" Medici glanced at him and asked impolitely, "Hurry up and say what you want to eat, I won't wait if you're late." As he spoke, he was wearing an apron, making one sigh that he truly lived up to the name Mother Medici. Roland couldn't help but laugh at this, his smile quite joyful as he said, "Little Red, sometimes I really wonder if one day, when you're cremated, your mouth will still be there." How could he not see that Medici had come home purely out of concern for him? HMPH. Medici sneered, looking at him and saying, "You don't have anything you want to eat, do you? Then I'll improvise. How about strawberry mapo tofu? That's too dark a dish." Roland immediately refused, then began to list dishes. After finishing his list, Roland looked at Amon and little K again and said, "Aren't you two helping Bethel?" "We were, but little K felt that Mr. Lucifer's actions were a bit unusual and was a little worried, so he dragged me back to check." Amon immediately raised his hand to answer first. Little K coughed slightly, a little embarrassed, then looked at Roland and asked, "I was indeed a bit worried, so is Mr. Lucifer okay?" "He's fine, what could happen to that old guy? He won't die even if you do." Roland smiled, casually took the cup from little K's hand, and began to make hand-ground coffee, just as he heard little K ask again. "What about you? Jack, how are you?" Roland's movements paused. He looked up at little K, seeing genuine concern and worry. At that moment, Roland understood that little K might not be completely ignorant of some things. It was just that, as he had once hoped, little K chose to play dumb. Roland then smiled, looking at little K generously and saying, "Of course I'm fine too, don't worry. Actually, you should be a little happier." Little K was stunned for a moment. Roland then said with a bright and sunny smile, "Because the apocalypse will end very soon. At that time, you can consider your future life plans, such as finding a girlfriend and then building a happy family." Although he no longer bore the responsibility of saving the world, as a candidate for Lord of the Mysteries, little K had never relaxed. He was indeed more relaxed and happier now than in his original fate, but he had never considered his own future, a future beyond saving others and saving the world. This time, little K was truly stunned. Since transmigrating, he had never considered these things. Before knowing the truth of his transmigration, it was because he wanted to go home and didn't want to inconvenience others. After knowing the truth of his transmigration, it was purely because he didn't want to involve others in those complicated matters, and he didn't have the time to think about these things. But if the apocalypse really ended, and he could live like an ordinary person? Little K was silent for a while, then suddenly scratched his head and said, "To be honest, even if the apocalypse really ends, I probably won't look for a girlfriend in the next few years. I'm only in my 20s, isn't it too early to consider marriage at this age?" This was the honest truth. Even before transmigrating, little K had never considered marrying too early, as late marriage was the common state in that era. Tisk. Roland clicked his tongue, as if disappointed, then said with a grin, "All right, I know you want to be a single dog for life. So besides being a single dog, after the apocalypse ends, is there anything else you want to do?" Little K was silent for a while, probably thinking. After a long time, he said, "Maybe I'll become a historian." Whether out of his own preference or the influence of the original Klein, little K was indeed very interested in unearthing the various histories of this world. "Understood, you want to be a party wipe engine." Roland nodded solemnly, making a tabletop role-playing game joke, then he looked at Amon and said, "What about you?" Amon. "Ah, is it my turn?" Amon was stunned for a moment. He then pinched the monocle on his face, thought seriously for a while, and then smiled, "I might become a magician. Magic is very interesting, and the audience's expressions are also very interesting." "Are you discussing your future life plans?" Mr. Isaac, who had returned to the villa at some point, asked curiously, interjecting. "Yes, after all, the apocalypse is ending soon, and the Republic's work will eventually be finished one day, so I think it's very necessary to consider future life plans." Roland nodded, looking at Mr. Isaac. He didn't ask why the other party was there, only said, "So, Mr. Isaac, what about you? What do you want to do after everything ends?" "Me. Mr. Azek showed a thoughtful expression, and a few seconds later, he smiled gently and said, "Perhaps I'll go back to Tingen and continue being a teacher." "What a simple ideal," Roland commented. "Probably because I'm just not a very ambitious person." Mr. Azek smiled gently, then gestured to the bag in his hand, which contained fresh fruit. "Want some?" "Yes." X3. So the three of them happily began to share the fruit. As the few of them were making a fruit platter, a knock sounded at the door. Roland raised an eyebrow, jogged to the door, and opened it, but didn't see anyone at first glance. "Hey, look down, where are you looking?" A familiar voice came from below. Roland, not at all surprised, looked down and saw the 7 or 8-year-old Will looking at him discontentedly. Chapter 489, Roland promotes to Olden Chaos. "You did that on purpose, didn't you? I don't believe you didn't sense who was outside the door," Will said, annoyed. "That's right." Roland didn't deny it at all, smiling as he raised his hand to ruffle Will's hair, saying, "After all, your height is really perfect for a joke like that. HMPH, just you wait. In a few years, I'll definitely be taller than you." Will grumbled, a bit displeased, but he didn't swat Roland's hand away. Instead, he made a gesture with his fingers. You'll definitely grow into a 2.4-meter double-door refrigerator, and then you'll have broad shoulders for canaries to lean on." Roland nodded perfunctorily, playing on the meme while pulling Will's hand into the house, then casually asking, "Medici told you?" "Who else but him?" Will countered, then added, "He said you might explode soon and told us to come back and see your last moments." "You believed him?" Roland glanced at him. "How could I? Everyone knows he's the most stubborn." Will shrugged, then suddenly became serious. "So, are you taking the final step?" "Yes." Roland smiled and nodded, whispering, "Happy. Once I take this step, you'll be able to accommodate the uniqueness. No need to be so anxious. Even if you can't do it, I can always ask Bethel for help." Will grumbled, his tone unclear, then added, "Don't forget you still owe me several months of ice cream." "I remember." Roland raised a hand and pointed to his head, smiling, "I won't forget for a single day." "That's more like it." As Will said this, he had already reached the dining table. He immediately saw the rich variety of fruits on the table and instantly said, "I like mangoes, save some for me." "What a coincidence, I like mangoes too." Roland grinned and moved the large portion of mangoes in front of him, demonstrating with actions what it meant to protect one's food. However, who was Will? Naturally, he wouldn't hand over his favorite fruit so easily, especially with little Amon fanning the flames nearby. And so, a fruit war began. And so, in the lively villa, Roland decided to become chaos. In the study, Roland wrote the last sentence on the ancient book. He then curled his lips, closed the ancient book, and took out the tools he usually used to prepare potions, then began to concoct the Lord of Pleasure potion. The finished Lord of Pleasure potion was incredibly beautiful, composed of 2 different colors, one half bright, the other sad. Within these colors, countless stories seemed to flow. Roland stared at it for a while, admiring the beauty of the Lord of Pleasure potion, and without hesitation, picked up the potion and drank it in one gulp. At that instant, it was hard to say what Roland truly experienced. He only felt as if his soul was torn in half, different emotions filling both ends of his soul. He wanted to laugh, yet also wanted to cry. Emotions like joy, anger, sorrow, and resentment almost submerged him, making him nearly drown in the ocean of emotions. Anything taken to an extreme is never a good thing, even emotions. Any extreme emotion can easily destroy a person. But Roland didn't truly drown in the ocean of emotions, because anchors tightly pulled him back. Those anchors were Roland's connection to this world, they were all the people connected to him. Their feelings and memories for Roland collectively pulled him, then helped Roland little by little to regain his true emotions and reconstruct his self. And Bethel, whom he personally pushed to the position of Lord of the Mysteries, his close connection with the world allowed Roland to use it as a base point, finding his own connection to this world, and thus landing safely. But Roland didn't open his eyes. Even though he had successfully advanced to Sequence 0 Lord of Pleasure, Roland knew this was not the end. Indeed, the moment Roland truly became Lord of Pleasure, the last piece of Nyarlathotep's power fragment within him seemed to resonate with the fragments Roland had already digested, and then spontaneously merged with Roland. But to Roland's surprise, this merging process was not painful, nor was it filled with various trials like the previous advancements, where one could get lost with a slight misstep. Instead, it was very smooth and gentle. Roland was stunned for a moment, then he suddenly understood. Advancing to Olden Chaos actually wasn't without a ritual. In fact, digesting all the potions in the correct way and order, and advancing to Olden Chaos was the ritual itself. And the purpose of this ritual was to use this world as a base point, allowing him to truly take root in this world, and thereby stabilize himself. From then on, he was no longer the little Nyarlathotep who could only wander around, but truly had his own home. And the moment Roland advanced to Olden Chaos, the entire world trembled. Whether it was reality, the starry sky, the spirit world, or the astral world, at this moment there was a slight but definite tremor. It seemed as if the entire universe was cheering, or perhaps trembling. A new Olden was born, a new pillar was born, a being who should not exist took root completely in this world. It seems to have succeeded. Sun God looked in a certain direction, his expression slightly complex. He then smiled, looking at Messiah beside him. Then it's time for us to take the final step too. The commotion in the entire universe didn't last too long. In fact, the tremor only lasted for a moment. By the time Roland, wearing Lucifer's disguise, came downstairs, the entire universe had returned to quiet. Why is everyone staring at me? Do I have flowers on my face? Roland walked down from the second floor, meeting everyone's gaze, and said with a smile. Because dinner is waiting for you now. If you don't come, the dishes will get cold. Medici glanced at him, his gaze carrying some scrutiny, then after a moment, he looked away and said with a curled lip, annoyed. All right, my bad. I almost let down our little Hong's good intentions. Roland raised his hands in surrender, then very consciously found a seat and poured himself a glass of red wine. He then raised his glass and said, so, cheers. Everyone looked at each other, and finally, they all smiled and raised their glasses, saying, cheers. After eating and drinking to their fill, Medici grumbled as he went to the kitchen to wash dishes. Little Kay very consciously followed to help, while little Amon ran off to cause trouble, leaving Aska and Jack to clean up the living room. And Roland, wearing Lucifer's disguise, poked Will and said, going to merge with the uniqueness or not? Are you in a hurry? Will, who is the only one exempt from chores due to his age, looked up at him and asked. Not really, it's just that I'm already in Olden now, and I'll definitely be fighting outer gods soon, while you're still just a sequence 1. Roland said, spreading his hands, you know, a sequence 1 level is very difficult to be effective on an outer god battlefield. Although we don't lack your combat power, you wouldn't want to not even have a chance to just make up the numbers, right? Is making up the numbers something glorious? Will snorted, but he didn't play coy. He nodded and said, the uniqueness isn't in my hands right now. I need to retrieve it first. Roland wasn't surprised by this. He nodded and said, all right, then come find me when you do. As they were speaking, they both suddenly froze, looking up in a certain direction. Chapter 490, The Final Battle Meeting. It is well known that when a sequence reaches a certain level, its birth causes a stir, and the Old One level is no exception. So, at this moment, they all felt one thing, God had been born. I hope Grisha defeated God, otherwise I'll have to fish it out again. Sigh, even the power of fiction is a bit insufficient, Roland sighed dramatically, saying. Will glanced at him but said nothing. The people in the kitchen walked out at this moment, although they also felt the commotion. Since everyone is so concerned about the sun god's condition, why don't we go and see? Roland glanced at them and suggested enthusiastically. Naturally, no one had any objection to this. So soon, a large group of visitors arrived in Forsaken Land of the Gods, because Roland had also called upon others on his way to Forsaken Land of the Gods. So you defeated it? Roland asked directly upon seeing the sun god. The sun god smiled gently upon hearing this. He raised his hand and rubbed his temples, saying, I did not fail my mission. Amazing. Roland immediately clapped like a seal, then remembered something and said, so, God lost the bet with me. Not an unexpected result. The sun god smiled, then looked at Roland and said, you are already an Old One. Roland nodded, smiling, so now we can consider the matter of the final battle. As Roland spoke, his gaze swept over everyone present. Because everyone was very concerned about the sun god's advancement, almost everyone had come, which was perfect for an impromptu meeting. Oh, right. Roland suddenly thought of something and snapped his fingers. A semi-illusory mask landed in Little K's hand. This is. Little K showed a puzzled expression. Your sequence isn't quite suitable for listening in on the final battle, but it's not good for you not to participate, so wear it. It can help you block some pollution, Roland explained with a smile. Little K understood and put on the mask without hesitation. The mask disappeared the moment it touched his face, turning into points of light and merging into his body. Little K felt as if some power was protecting him, bringing a strong sense of security. Roland then thought of something else and had the small trumpet take out the bamboo slip usually used to contact the Western continent. Then he looked at Bethel and said, Bethel, open the seal of the new continent. We should face the coming apocalypse together. Although with him, Bethel, and the sun god present, even without the help of the Western continent, theoretically surviving the apocalypse was already a foregone conclusion. But since it was the final battle, they had to give the Western continent a sense of participation. All right. Bethel nodded, not refusing the suggestion. Roland then wrote on the bamboo slip, we are about to open the seal. Prepare yourselves. Soon, there was a reply on the bamboo slip. Quote question mark question mark question mark quote. Fellow Taoist, what happened? Is the progress that fast? Indeed, so give us a coordinate. We are just about to hold a combat meeting against the starry sky. After opening the seal, we will come to pick you up, and you can join the meeting, Roland continued to write on the bamboo slip. As he wrote these words, a group of people had already arrived beside the Western continent's sealed wall. Bethel stepped forward. After mobilizing the power belonging to Lord of the Mysteries, the seemingly unchanging gray mist wall finally changed. The mist began to dissipate, slowly at first, then extremely quickly. In just a moment, the sealed wall disappeared completely, revealing a landscape entirely different from forsaken land of the gods within. And besides the different scenery, at this very moment, an old man holding a bamboo slip stood on the other side of where the sealed wall had been. His expression still held unvanished shock. After a moment of stunned, he looked at the large crowd on the opposite side. Hi. Roland enthusiastically greeted the old man opposite, are you the Heavenly Master? I am Lucifer, Jack's teacher. If the Saviors, group on the North and South continent, regardless of age, generally used younger appearances, then the Saviors, team on the Western continent gave a sense of an old-school hot-blooded anime. This made Roland look at his own group, his gaze sweeping over Will, who was younger than anyone else, the youngest even looking like a child. Then he looked at the Heavenly Master on the opposite side, who clearly looked highly respected, and finally, pinching his chin, said, I always feel like we've lost in terms of aura. Fellow Taoist is truly humorous. The Heavenly Master naturally could not have failed to hear this. He looked warily at Roland, who was clearly the core of the opposite team, and thinking of the commotion he had felt not long ago, he tentatively asked, was it fellow Taoist who advanced recently? If you mean the time before last, that was me. The last time was him, Roland pointed to the sun god next to him. He could, of course, also see the wariness of the team centered around the Heavenly Master towards him. Roland didn't care about this at all, only smiling and saying, I know you are wary of me, but don't worry, we have a long time to get along, and you will understand what kind of person I am. Quote. Please forgive me, fellow Taoist. It's truly fellow Taoist's essence that makes it hard not to be concerned, the Heavenly Master said after a pause, clearly not expecting Roland to be so direct. It's fine, I'm used to it. Roland waved his hand and said with a smile, let's talk about the final battle. I conservatively estimate I can take on 10. You guys can divide the rest. Oh, and remember to come to me for a save crystal before the battle. While being fearless in death is good, unnecessary sacrifice is not. At these words, the scene was silent for a few seconds. The statement of one person taking on 10 was quite astonishing, as theoretically, even at the pillar level, facing outer gods, being able to fight 1 against 3 was already very good. If anyone else had said this, they would certainly have thought the other party was exaggerating, but since Roland said it, everyone was accustomed to it. Even if the people of the Western continent were not familiar with Roland, They could vaguely discern Roland's essence, so they could roughly understand why the other party dared to say such a thing. Thus, with the premise of Roland fighting 10, everyone began to allocate the remaining outer gods. And because the Sun God, who had become God, and Bethel, who had become Lord of the Mysteries, were present, the strongest among the remaining outer gods was naturally quickly decided upon. So much so that when it was truly distributed to the others, there were only a few outer gods left, and their side had several people for one, with plenty to spare. Everyone, don't try to be brave then. If you really can't win, just stall for a while. Once I've eliminated or sealed them, I can come and help you. Roland did not forget to instruct. Bringing these Sequence 0 and non-Sequence 0 people into the group was to give them more participation in the final battle, but even if they really couldn't win, as long as they could stall for a period, Roland would be able to free up his hands. Having completely digested Nyarlathotep's power fragments and become chaos, he was now super strong. After thinking for a moment, Roland raised his hand and pulled, and a shadow solidified from the air. It was a being whose face was unfamiliar to many, but whose aura was not. It was God. Chapter 491, The End of Days concludes the grand finale. God. The people of the Western continent were clearly stunned after witnessing Roland's casual summon. They had no idea Roland possessed such a capability. I won the bet. Now, it's time for you to fulfill your promise, God. Roland smiled as he looked at the god he had summoned. He wasn't worried about the other party reneging on the bet. In the past, he might not have had the ability to suppress the other party, but that was no longer the case. God opened his eyes, his gaze falling upon Roland. He clearly understood something, and deep apprehension appeared in his eyes. Then, God curved his lips into a faint smile and said, I will fulfill my promise. I will help you all fight against the outer gods. All right. Then, when the time comes, you'll act as a jungler. Whichever side can't hold on, you go help them. Roland wasn't being coy, he nodded and began to assign tasks to God. After assigning tasks to God, Roland didn't bother to explain anything to the astonished people of the Western continent. He looked at Lilith and said, Lilith, I once promised to help you kill the mother goddess of depravity, but at that time, I didn't consider the impact of killing the mother goddess on reality. So now, I can give you two choices. First, I will still kill the mother goddess and temporarily maintain the stability of reality, but as the mother goddess's successor, you must bear the corresponding responsibility and grow into the third pillar as soon as possible. Roland paused here, looked at Lilith, and asked, do you think you can do it? Lilith hesitated. She was not a being without self-awareness. Even if the mother goddess truly fell, she was not confident that she could definitely become the third pillar. So, after a moment of hesitation, Lilith spoke, what's the second choice? I will seal the mother goddess of depravity. Roland didn't keep them in suspense. He smiled when he said this, once sealed, the mother goddess cannot interfere with reality, and naturally, she cannot interfere with you. But because she is still alive, this will also not cause the collapse of reality. I choose the second option. Lilith said without any hesitation. She had no ambition to necessarily become the third pillar, being able to escape the mother goddess's influence was her greatest pursuit. Good. Roland nodded, then looked at the others and said, among the outer gods, there are those who are difficult to kill, or whose deaths would cause adverse effects. When the time comes, these beings can all be handed over to me for sealing. How long can the seal last? The Heavenly Master suddenly asked. Forever, if I wish. Roland smiled as he looked at him and replied, I know you don't quite trust me, so these sealed outer gods can also be handed over to you for safekeeping. Oh, right, Roland thought of something else and added, although the outer gods cannot interfere with the outside world in their sealed state, I can grant you permission to steal their power while they are sealed. Of course, there will be a certain risk, mainly the risk of contamination, so please use it cautiously. If there are truly unfortunate beings who get contaminated, you can also come to me for treatment. This was also the reason why Roland suddenly changed his mind from eradicating the outer gods to sealing them. Directly killing them wasn't as efficient as turning them into batteries. Roland had always been an efficiency enthusiast. Thus, a strategic meeting for the battle against the Starry Sky, led by Roland, came to an end. And on the seventh day after the meeting ended, when everyone was ready, and even Will had assimilated the fate uniqueness with Roland's help, under Roland's leadership, everyone entered the starry sky. Just as we discussed, the Mother Goddess, the Mother Tree, Roland rattled off a long list of names as if reciting a menu, and finally said, "Leave them to me. Everyone, hold on to your save crystals. Once a crystal is used, immediately retreat within the barrier. God, do your jungling work. Whether we can clear the starry sky dungeon with 0 casualties depends on you." As Roland was giving his instructions, the outer gods had naturally already reacted. More precisely, the outer gods, led by the Mother Goddess, had already gathered outside Earth. After all, the outer gods weren't fools, they weren't unaware of the successive advancements of Old Ones on Earth. They simply couldn't directly attack Earth due to the barrier. So, facing the proactive Earth side, the outer gods quickly reacted. Among them, the Mother Goddess looked at Roland, with both apprehension and hatred in her eyes, and said, "You are a bit too confident. Even you, I'm afraid, cannot face 10 of us simultaneously." "That's hard to say." Roland smiled at them. While they were speaking, the others on the battlefield also made their moves, and the battlefield division was quickly completed. Roland casually threw a protective barrier over Earth, for no particular reason other than to prevent accidental damage later. He then looked up at the Mother Goddess, smiling, and said, "We can be considered old friends. Although we haven't officially met before this, you have indirectly given me a lot of help. Without your contamination, I wouldn't have been able to recruit those contaminated by you so smoothly." HMPH. The Mother Goddess snorted, her expression not looking too good, as she recalled some unpleasant memories. "So, as compensation," Roland paused here, his smile exceptionally bright, "I will allow you to live in the seal until the end of the universe." Roland was met with a large expanse of crimson power. Roland remained unhurried, effortlessly dissolving the Mother Goddess's attack, and simultaneously blocking the attacks of the other outer gods who had launched their assaults alongside the Mother Goddess's attack. He remarked with a sigh, so irritable. This was not a tragic decisive battle. After all, with Roland single-handedly engaging 10 outer gods, and Bethel and the Sun God in excellent condition, plus a genuine god jungling nearby, this decisive battle was practically impossible to lose. Especially when Roland freed up his hands to deal with the other outer gods, the battle ended even faster. Many people didn't even need to use their save crystals, receiving reinforcements after engaging their opponents for a period of time. When the last outer god was sealed in a time amber, Roland clapped his hands, genuinely arranging all the outer god ambers together, and then, pulling out a camera from who knows where, he called out to everyone. Come, everyone, come over. It would be too regrettable not to take a commemorative photo at such a momentous occasion." The remaining people on the battlefield looked at each other. Finally, Medici led the way and walked to Roland's side. Little K was brought over by Bethel. Although the sun god's smile was a bit helpless, he also beckoned the others to walk over. And the people of the Western continent looked at each other. Ultimately, at the Heavenly Master's signal, they hesitantly walked to Roland's side. 1, 2, 3, cheese. Click. Thus, the most commemorative and valuable photograph in this world appeared. Roland wasn't satisfied yet, so he individually arranged many people into various combinations to take many unique photos, such as Little K and the Mother Tree, and the Mother Goddess and Lilith, and so on. After all the photos were taken, Roland put down the camera and looked at the crowd, who, despite being slightly disheveled from the battle, were in good spirits. He smiled and said, "Rejoice, everyone, the end of days is over. A new era has arrived." The end. For more thrilling fanfiction stories like this, check out my channel Fanfic Audiobook. Dive into epic adventures, mysterious realms, and legendary journeys brought to life through immersive storytelling. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more amazing audiobooks.